Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30, our new meeting time on Thursday, August 4th. I'd like to call our meeting to order. Our meeting is being broadcast and recorded by WCTV and audio recorded by Jamie Wixton. Would you please stand for the pledge? Thank you. I would like to first start the meeting by welcoming our new superintendent, Dr. Matt DeAndrea. He's been on the job since July 1st, but this is his first official school committee meeting with us. So Dr. DeAndrea, welcome to Wareham. I would also like to welcome our presenter tonight for our workshop, which will make up the majority of our meeting, Dorothy Presser, who's a field director from Mask, longtime school committee member herself. And we are very grateful to have her lead our workshop later on this evening. Thank you. We're going to start our meeting first with the report of the Director of Finance, Kristen Flynn. Well, I'm going to do that first. I'll let Kristen go first, and then we can let her leave.
Good evening. In your packet tonight, you have some budget transfers. There's 4 of them. These are required to close the year, as these will close out all of our deficits that we had in various line items. I'll briefly review the school committee transfer policy. So what we see here are transfers that either there's already been $25,000 transferred into or out of those accounts. That's one of the thresholds if you transfer within what's called the major accounts. The major accounts are Department of Ed function codes, and they're denoted by 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. So within those accounts, $25,000 can be transferred without a school committee vote if we were going to transfer from one 2,000 account to another. Outside of those accounts, if you're ever going to transfer from, say, a 4,000 or into a 4,000 facilities from an instruction 2,000, that requires a school committee vote, no matter the dollar level. So you're going to see a mixture of both in these. That's the reason for a lot of these. So I'll start with the ones that were in order in your packet.
Yes.
Quick question for Kristen.
Sure.
That policy was developed by the school committee. I think I was on the school committee when we developed it. What is your personal opinion of that policy?
So in my experience, in the district that I was in, the policy was between major accounts. So it didn't matter the dollar value. So if you had some tuition, say in the 9,000 accounts, and you needed to do a transfer to clear a deficit, say in collaborative tuition, of 50,000, but you had that in private tuition, also a 9,000 account, that transfer could be made at the school business manager or superintendent level. If, for example, give that same 50,000 in collaborative tuition, if you didn't have it in another tuition account and you had to look to an instruction account, a 2,000 account, that would require school committee approval. So we did not have the dollar level threshold. It was just within the major accounts. And that, on the one hand, that gave the school business manager and the superintendent and the other department heads a little bit more flexibility to do budget transfers and not wait for a school committee meeting. On the other hand, if you, in the interest of knowing and transparency, that $25,000 is a lot of money, so you may want to have that approved at a meeting. I will say that in my former district, all budget transfers, no matter what level, all budget transfers that were done, if they weren't for school committee approval, I would place a copy of it in the agenda, so at least it was available for the school committee to review at that time. So they did see all transfers. They just voted on the ones that were outside of their major accounts, the Department of Education Function Code.
And does our new superintendent have an opinion on this policy?
Yeah, I've never seen a policy like this.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I don't know. My experience has been similar to Kristen's, where if the transfer is within the program, then it's only the superintendent's approval. If it's between programs, then it needs to go to the school committee for approval. I had districts on the island that wanted any budget transfers to go to the school committee, and I had some that were a little bit more relaxed on that. But having a dollar amount attached to it is something that I have to really kind of experience to understand the pros and cons of it.
I can tell you when it was developed, it was felt that budget transfers changed the budget by definition, and therefore had the potential to change the priorities that that budget reflects. And that was the logic behind it. But speaking only for myself, I'm more than willing to hear, thoughts about how we might modify it or not. And then this committee could decide whether that was an appropriate change to make or not. But I guess it would go through the policy review committee first and then come to the full committee.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So just building on that, I will say some of these transfers, especially at the end of the year when we're trying to get bills paid, and the town has a policy that there's no line item deficit spending. So some towns will allow you, because the school committee budget is one line item budget, right? So in my former district, they weren't so particular about disallowing bills that would put an account into deficit, as long as they knew that the overall line item was still, the one line item budget was there. So getting back to this, at the end of the year, when some of the accounts were quickly becoming exhausted because of, unanticipated expenditures from when it was budgeted, it became a little difficult to be able to pay the bills on time, and still keeping in mind, once we, maybe we got up to that $25,000 threshold. So then, in order to pay that bill, we would have to do a budget transfer, and that would require a school committee meeting. So it didn't allow for as much flexibility as what I've seen. So that's one that's one suggestion about that. However, like you said, if we are doing transfers of certain dollar amounts, it may change the priority, or it may just be necessary based on circumstances that have happened throughout the year. So with that, I'll get to the 4 budget transfers. So I'm going to go in order of the way that they were listed in your packet. The first one is one for transferring $5,000 into student services home instruction. So this is our home tutoring line. We faced a lot of home tutoring this year, more so than what was anticipated. So for example, the original budget for that was $40,000, and the overall expended by June 30th is $61,405. So we did some transfers throughout the year in that account, and this one here, you can see it's between the 2000 account. It's that number that's in the 5th position in the big long account number. So you can see we could have done that one without school committee. This is an example approval, however, because we had already transferred into that account, or from the other one, a total of $25,000, we hit the cumulative limit throughout the year. So that's why this one is. So we have that transfer. Now, Mr. Chair, would you rather review and approve these on a case-by-case basis or all at once?
Maybe just one at a time.
Okay.
You can vote on it right
Okay.
after you present it. You're okay with that as well?
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
So do I have a motion to accept this transfer that we're discussing right now from account 2100 to 2300?
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? 500. Thank you.
Okay, the next transfer is the big one that we used to close the books at the end of the year. We took the rest of our deficits, and these here were ones that you can see that they couldn't have been dealt with without a school committee meeting throughout the year, because as you can see, some of the transfer requests into the accounts exceeded that $25,000 limit, and the rest of them may have already had transfers into those accounts or from the accounts we were sourcing for $25,000. So you'll see it's a 4-page one. It's the one that I gave you the hard copy of this evening. It's a 4-page one. It starts with insurance for active employees. That account was not budgeted at all. this year. And what that account is, it's insurance. It's the insurance for the positions that were hired, I believe, as a result of the pandemic. So additional positions that were not anticipated that were hired to support some of the pandemic related costs. So there was an agreement between the former superintendent and the town administrator that actually spans 3 years. And it states, during FY22, Wareham Public Schools hired additional personnel that were outside the normal staff replacement that would happen in a normal year. This yielded an unanticipated benefit cost of $454,436.88. And that was paid from the health, dental, and life insurance lines of the, presumably of the town budget. So these positions were not intended to be permanent, so these were additional positions. The memo goes on to say this has put a burden on benefit costs and should be covered by Wareham Public Schools as it is above and beyond the normal budget. So in an effort to work with the school department, the town will absorb some of the costs. So an agreement was made over the next 3 years, FY22 being the first year, so over the next 2 years, what would be charged to the school department for this additional health insurance. Now, again, these positions were not positions that that I believe, I'm not sure, we normally had. These were additional positions. So it wasn't like someone retired and they were replaced. It was an additional position. So in FY22, the agreement was made to charge $175,000. So that's why you see that here. So that is a charge, a cost that is going to be absorbed by the school department and paid to the town for the insurance. And there are numbers for next year and the year after, which may be reconsidered because if these positions are no longer in effect. So that'll be something that we will have to discuss further. So that's, I wanted to highlight, I don't, unless you would like me to, I don't need to go through all of the line items, but I know that I wanted to highlight that big dollar amount and give you some explanation as to why that is for that
Right,
one.
and I'll let Mr. Sweat ask a question. I would say you don't have to highlight each individual one unless there's a question from the committee on any one, on one of them. Mr. Sweat?
So let me be clear. There's a memo, which, speaking for myself, I haven't seen it, that states for the year that we just finished and for the next 2 years, signed by the town administrator and the superintendent,
Yes, the former
Former
superintendent,
superintendent?
yes.
that stipulates how much we will pay for this year, past year, and the next 2 years.
Correct.
And what are those two numbers
So
that we haven't paid yet?
Right, so for FY23, the amount is $350,000, and then in parentheses, it says positions that are deleted and not refilled may reduce this amount. Now, I will say, this agreement was made in May of this year, so that was after budget time. So we could be in the same situation, a year from now, if it wasn't anticipated when the budget was made over a year ago. I do have a listing of all of the positions.
Sorry, what was the third year number?
The third year, $367,500.
I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I'm not even sure the superintendent had the authority to commit those funds. But I'll have to think about that. Those are big numbers, and the ability to negotiate that number down is not clear unless it's clear in the memorandum. Maybe we can table this until the next time the Budget Advisory Committee meets, because this is a big deal. To me, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I'm, relatively new to this. I'm a new member. I'm writing these numbers down, and just think that before I even get to look at my first budget, we're going to be $350,000 in the hole next year. To start is kind of scary. So, is there any chance, perhaps, that you could send us, or we could get a copy
Absolutely.
of that memo so that we can review it and see what's what?
Absolutely, I can
Thank
do
you, I
that.
appreciate that.
And I did a listing of the personnel, and I have some notes when I went over them, shortly after I started in June, as to which positions were new, which positions were replacements, and which positions were, are no longer, you know, in our department. So I know that that's something that before we move forward, we'll take a close look at that to look at that 350,000 for this year.
One thing I did want to ask.
Just around April, just ask for recognition first, April.
So just so I understand, I know that we had hired certain positions because of, is that better? Okay, sorry. I know that we had hired certain positions with the funding that we received from COVID, and those were some of those temporary positions. So when we were given the funds from the state or the federal government, whatever, to create these positions, and we voted those into our, you know, temporary budget using that particularly earmarked monies, there was never any sort of like caveat for benefits to be a part of that. Like, I'm just confused how we're finding out about it now when these positions were created, essentially kind of 2 years ago, when all of the shutdowns and, you know, coming back in and sort of
Right.
redirecting
I
things.
understand what you're asking, but unfortunately, I can't answer that because I wasn't here at the time, so I don't know, you know, what was budgeted, what positions were created, what, if anything, was considered for insurance costs. So, you know, I was given the charge from the town that that's what was owed to the town, and it was done through a journal entry, which created the deficit.
Thank you.
Joyce.
So you said that the original number was $400 and some odd dollars, $400 and some odd $1,000. How many employees does that reflect? Does that cost?
So
you
the
know?
ones that,
That's okay. You don't have to
Yeah.
count them up right now
so I
if you
have
don't
the
have the number.
replacements, it looks like, yes, I can, when I send you that memo, I can answer that
Okay.
as well,
Okay.
okay? And then, like I said, that's going to be a priority to, you know, to look at for next year. Because I believe this number, the 175, from what I was told, was an agreement that was made, because it was, my opinion is, it was lessened because it was actually more than what, you know, if you added up all the health insurance cost that it cost the town share, it was more than 175 for this fiscal year. So I think, in my opinion, that number, I wasn't part of those discussions, but that number was most likely considered, given that it was, you know, in the spring of the year, and we were coming up on June 30th.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I agree with Jeff. I mean, this is the first that we've heard of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. First of all of us. Dr. Dandrew?
I was just gonna say that, as we're, you know, as we start looking closer at the FY '23 budget, coming up over the next couple of weeks and into the ESSER grant, we'll get a little clearer picture if there was some money that's been allocated for this purpose. I'm also gonna be meeting with the town administrator, and I'm gonna be talking to him about that. And I can definitely provide you with more information at our next meeting,
Okay.
or prior.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I did have one more
Brandon.
question, just so that I understand this correctly. This 175,000, you said that for the next 2 years, you know, for the 350,000 next year and the 367 the year after, those numbers could be reduced depending on what staff is still left.
Correct.
Does this 175,000 reflect a reduction of staff that's already happened? I mean, you said that it was a higher number.
Right.
What was that number originally? So can we anticipate, you know, like, for example, let's say that this number was originally 350,000, and we see this year it's reduced to 175. Can we possibly hope that, I mean, just so that we have a rough idea, could we plan that maybe next year we're gonna see a similar type reduction? Or could that number be, you know, only reduced to 300,000 or 325? I mean, how much of a drop can we anticipate? And does this year's number reflect it? Does that make
Right,
sense?
so, yes, so what I can tell you about this year's number is, given the spreadsheet of the positions and the employees, and the cost of their insurance. And this is only if the, if these new hires, so to speak, took the insurance, whether it was health, dental, life insurance. So when I went through all of the ones just to make sure that these numbers were okay, that 175 is quite a break, because the total new employees, it's a little bit of a break. The total new employees is 180,000 for this year, okay? So if we add up all the new employees and their health insurance costs, it came to 180,000.
For the
Now,
past
there are, yes, for FY '22. There were some employees here that in a review with Dr. Shaver-Hood and payroll were replacements. So those will have to come off, right? Those were replacements. So originally, the entire amount that was added up for FY '22 was about 400,000, 402,000, of which just under 180 was the new positions. So that's why I said that will most definitely, those figures for '23 and '24 have to be reviewed to see, if all things remain. Health insurance cost is probably gonna go up a little bit, but the base of employees is probably not going to be greater. It would be the same or maybe less if they're no longer here. So that's definitely something to look at.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else you want to say about this grouping of transfers?
Nope,
I'm just assuming that the minor indicus was just to Wareham Elementary. Just-
Yeah, so
okay.
I think that is my assumption that, because we had two schools that merged into one
Right.
during the course of the year, that adjustment was required. But I can tell you in the fiscal '23 budget, it's all budgeted in Wareham Elementary, so there are no more costs in the other schools.
Does any other member have a question about anything else on this listing? Joyce?
I don't, it's not actually a question. I just wanted to point out, by looking at this report, it looks like we were within $492 of budgeting correctly for the utilities at Wareham Elementary. And that was a big discussion with the building committee, with the finance committee at the time. So I just want to point out that hopefully we do that well this year also, but we came within 492. Yeah.
Some good news.
Yes, it is good news. It is good news.
On the other hand, $26,000 was available from the high school to transfer to help. So I'm not sure anybody in this room should take credit for fantastic budgeting.
Well, we'll have to give that credit to Renee for his conservation efforts at the high school, right?
Renee deserves lots of credit.
Yes, yes. Okay.
All right, so on this transfer, do we need a separate vote then?
Yes, please.
Okay, so do I have a motion to accept the transfers of $723,878?
So moved.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay, 500. Thank you.
Okay, so your third transfer is actually one from this fiscal year already. For FY '23, you'll see that it's high school instructional supplies that Mr. Palladino is seeking to transfer 12,000 into. And the reason behind this is that when they uncovered some furniture that was stored, it unfortunately had gotten ruined due to the humidity. And I can tell you that in my former district, we faced that. So I think it was just something that all schools were facing as they stored and put away furniture wherever that location was. We had storage trailers that should have been, airtight. They weren't. So what Mr. Palladino needs to do is replace some classroom furniture such as science lab stools, student classroom tables. And you see here, this is a good example of that between accounts. So when he first talked to me about it, I said, well, what do you have in any of your 2,000 accounts? Because he wanted to go ahead and get this going. And there wasn't enough that he didn't have committed in his 2,000 accounts, his instructional supplies, that wasn't already committed. So maybe it hadn't been spent, but he knew he would be spending it. Okay, so then the next best thing was to go outside of the 2,000. So that's why this transfer is at your attention now. So again, like I said, he's looking to transfer 12,000 from equipment, which is a maintenance and facilities line, the 4230, into his instructional equipment, which is 2420. And that was to replace some classroom furniture that was damaged by mold in storage due to the pandemic.
April?
So obviously, I know you sat with Mr. Palladino to go through this, but obviously, like, for having this be a facilities line item that was budgeted, was this like facilities for like, you know, ventilation, heating system, like what type of facility account was this that they're looking to draw from? And is there any possibility, because as of right now, I think the high school might be our oldest operating building, that this could possibly affect anything throughout the school year?
Right, so the account is high school equipment contracted services, so that would be generally if we called in, say, an HVAC technician, if it was something that our staff couldn't handle, so it would be any contracted service that you would have an outside vendor come in. I can say that this is the account that we discussed. I would think that Mr. Palladino, you know, knew how much he had budgeted in that account, and that was the best place he could draw it from.
Well, and we now have an HVAC person on
We
staff
do.
for the district, so, okay.
So that may preclude, you know, having to call in, you know, say an HVAC service agency or anything like that. You know, we have tradespeople that are employed, so it would preclude us from maybe from calling in. Some of the bigger jobs, obviously, you know, one person can't do, so you would have to call someone in.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff?
Just a quick question. If our HVAC employee had to buy things in order to repair things, what account would that come from?
So most likely, there is a line which is high school equipment supplies. So it would be so it would be supplies or equipment repair. So sometimes there's a fine
different
line,
account
a
is the
different
bottom line.
account. It would be within the same 4230. So the difference is you know, I'm giving you a lot of information here, but that number that you see after the 4,000, the 4230, the 04, that's what the Department of Ed uses also for reporting purposes. So a 1, a 2, or a 3 denotes a salary. A 1 is a professional salary, 2 and 3 are clerical or other. A 4 is a contracted service, a 5 is a supply. So you would see that 4230.05. And so it would be very close, but one is just saying someone's gonna come in and do the work, the other is saying these are the materials we need for it, okay?
Well, I hope Eric has anticipated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And do we vote on this one also separately, or is that part of the,
This is a separate one as well,
okay,
please.
so do I have a motion to make
So
that
moved.
transfer?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 500. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have one final one for FY '22. There's actually, I split it up into 2 different categories because one is utilities, and you can see that we're transferring from high school utilities into middle school utilities. And this was to be able to cover and finish out paying the utilities bills for the middle school. So here, you see it's the same account, 4130, just 2 different buildings. Normally, that would be okay, but because we had already transferred out at least 25,000 from high school utilities, that's why it's coming to your attention tonight. So that's the first part, is from high school utilities to middle school utilities. The second one is to transfer for collaborative tuition. We had a tuition bill that we received close to the end of the fiscal year for a collaborative placement, and we needed to transfer in $16,606 to cover that tuition. So you can see here, we only had about 4,000 left in that other 9,000 account, the tuition, this private. So in order to complete that, we needed to look outside the 9,000 because there was nothing left in 9,000. So we looked at the curriculum instructional software line that did have funds in it. So you see transfer coming in from the 2455, which is the curriculum instructional software, to help cover the deficit of that collaborative tuition.
Any questions? Do I have a motion? Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to
Ed.
thank you for, like, over-explaining everything, because there have been moments in the last few years on the committee where I look at these numbers and I don't get it. So the fact that you have broken it down, I really do appreciate, because no one, I think, has ever prior to explained those codes so clearly. So I just want to appreciate the work that you put in and helping me understand it a little bit better. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Yep, so that goes, for everyone. If there's a question, I can certainly try to answer it. I like to provide a lot of information for you folks and also for any of the public that might be watching, so that they can understand, because, they might hear, oh, the school department transferred had $175,000 transfer. Without any context, people may, cast aspersions and make their own assumptions. So I always like to provide that information, so, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to accept those two transfer proposals for utilities and private school tuitions? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 500. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Kristen.
very much. That's
Thank
it
you,
for me.
Kristen.
Thank you.
All right, now we will go to number 2 on the agenda, but Kristen, have a good evening. Feel free to enjoy it. Minutes of the meeting of April 28th, which you have received in your packet. If there are no questions, I'll accept the motion to
So moved.
approve. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 500. Thank you very much. All right, now we move to the main purpose of our meeting today. This is a workshop meeting, by the way, designated as a workshop, and that's where we get some professional development as a school committee, which, as I was reading earlier this evening, is a sign of one sign of a high-functioning school committee is that they attend professional development. And so Matt and I discussed earlier in his tenure here if that's something we'd like to do, and I thought it was a good idea. And we're fortunate to have Dorothy Presser with us, who's been a school committee member for over 20 years. As I said, she's a field director for Mass Association of School Committees, and she's a well-respected workshop presenter. So welcome to Wareham, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. So what we'd like to do this evening, I didn't know this was your very first meeting. So you're essentially a new governance team, right? You've had some changes. I can tell by your name tag that you're also the new person, because it's not yet engraved, it's just paper.
My name tag.
Gavin mentioned that there was one very new member, so you've been outed. So you're a new team, right? So some of you have been here a while. Matt comes from a different community, district. So in order to not sort of have some assumptions about this is how we work together, this is how we communicate, having that discussion about it can be very helpful. And we usually set the table by just sort of reviewing the roles and responsibilities of the superintendent and of the school committee. I'm going to try to get through that fairly quickly so we can get to some discussion about how you're going to work together. I usually set the table by reminding you that as a school committee, according to the National School Boards Association, the overarching mission of any school committee is continuous improvement in student achievement. And we're not just talking about scores, right? We're talking about what you want your students to achieve, the skills, the competencies, and so academic, social, emotional, and so forth, that you would like them to develop as they move through your schools and as they cross the stage of graduation. So part of your job is to be making sure that you are providing that good education for your students and hopefully that continuous improvement in what you're doing for them. So as Kevin alluded to, there are certain things that we know from research are qualities and attributes of highly effective school committees that have that high impact on student achievement. We certainly know that what happens at the committee table has an effect down into the classroom. So how do you work and operate together to have that positive effect for your students? First of all, effective committees have a vision of high expectations. So when there are challenges, you're looking at those as obstacles to be overcome, not excuses for why things aren't happening in the district. You are holding yourselves accountable and other members of the school community accountable for the work that goes on in the district. Brendan, you probably realize very quickly that there's a lot of data that's going to cross the table in front of you, right? So effective school committees will take that data and figure out what's the really important data for us to be digging into and understanding. So instead of looking at a lot of data at a very superficial level, you're taking that step back and saying, what is the important data for us to be focusing on and understanding and monitoring? Effective school committees focus on relationships among themselves as a governance team. We consider the school committee and the superintendent together to be that governance team that needs to work effectively, but also relationships within the school community and within the community as a whole, because you're not going to be able to do what you want to do for your students without those relationships and without the support of the entire community. And effective school committees work in a spirit of collaboration with trust and respect amongst the team members. So some of the other attributes and practices are that focus on student achievement. So at your meetings, you are getting presentations that help you monitor student progress and understand what's going on in the classroom that you can have an impact on at the board table. Effective school committees set goals. I love the line, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? So you've laid out a road, you have goals for the district in terms of a plan that you're monitoring and going forward. Monitoring those goals and making sure that they're implemented becomes a part of your work. You know, if you're not monitoring them and making sure that they're going to happen, you might have set the goals and they sit on a table and everyone's kind of going off in other directions. So you want to make sure that that monitoring function is happening. Engaging in self-governance, so occasionally stepping back, like you're doing tonight, along with the professional development that you're doing tonight, and saying, you know, are we doing the best job we said that, you know, are we doing the best job that we can? Or are there ways that as a committee we can improve the work that we're doing on behalf of our students? Any questions so far?
Let me respectfully disagree. You merged the superintendent and his team, well, certainly you merged the superintendent with the school committee as the governing entity. To me, there has to be a bright line between governance and management. And
So the team needs to be able to work together effectively.
I don't disagree with
Right,
that.
so you have to each understand your role in that leadership.
Completely
Okay,
agree.
yep.
But one is governance and the other is management.
So if I said leadership team, would you be okay?
That's, no, actually, because I know she thinks I'm playing semantics here. I'm not, because there's a huge difference between governance and management and the execution of the vision, for example. And I think it is extremely easy for governance to overstep and become part of management.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And therefore, I think it's tremendously important to draw that bright line between governance and management. That's
Okay.
one person's opinion. The second thing, and it's not a disagreement, is that I agree with everything you're talking about, but my struggle has been for over a dozen years, measurement.
Mm-hmm,
You said, and we're talking about a lot more than scores.
yep,
Couldn't agree more. But it's the measurement
yep.
of those things that are not scores that has always been troublesome.
Well, not everything that you're measuring, you're not measuring everything by a number, right, necessarily?
Yes, although measured numbers have a way of bringing clarity.
Sometimes, but there are things that you measure that aren't scores. You might measure absenteeism. You might measure staff turnover.
Those
There
are both quantifiable.
But they're not scores. They're not MCAS scores.
They're
That's-
numbers.
Yeah. I said scores. I didn't
Okay.
say numbers, I said scores.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. We okay? So you can take umbrage at this, but I'm going to say that there are different leadership roles that the superintendent has and that the school committee has. The superintendent, this committee is leading from that governance viewpoint, and the superintendent is leading from a management viewpoint. So maybe this is the clarity that you're looking for, right? So the superintendent is responsible for managing the day-to-day operations of the building or of the district, and is coming to the school committee with recommendations about goals, with recommendations about budget, with recommendations about policy. The school committee is deliberating over those recommendations, making a decision, and then handing it back to the superintendent to implement the decisions that the school committee has made. So you are asking some of those bigger picture questions. You as the school committee are asking those bigger picture questions of what and why and how much. Not that the superintendent doesn't ask how much too, right? But the superintendent is asking some other questions of how does the work get done? Who's doing the work? When does it happen? Where does it happen? Particularly at goal setting time, the committee is the bridge between the community and the superintendent. You're bringing the visions and values of the community to the table. Superintendent is bringing the needs of the staff to get the job done. And those two things are coming together as you're having those discussions and making those decisions. And you both have the responsibility for promoting trust and mutual respect in that relationship. And when it's all humming along well, you'll have the trust of the community. Yes?
I just wanted to ask about how the strategic plan plays into all of that you're talking about.
Can't hear you.
Is this better? It's on.
That's better.
Okay. So how the strategic plan plays into this,
So can you give me a
well,
little
you're
bit more
talking about
context?
vision, goals, different, the bigger questions, the
Yeah.
smaller question, or the management versus
Yep,
governance questions. And so, to me, I see it all connected to the strategic and school
Yep.
improvement plans, and that we all become part of that whole
Right.
process together,
exactly.
each taking a role. So that's just, is that what you mean when you're talking about
Yes.
those things?
Yep.
Okay,
Right,
thanks.
so when the strategic plan is originally put together, right, you're getting a lot of input from a lot of different stakeholders, right? And that there's generally a group that's administration and school committee combined, or the superintendent is coming with, here's everything we've learned. School committee is ultimately approving that strategic plan, saying, yes, this is the plan moving forward. Then part of the job of the superintendent and administration is to put those plans into action, right? To develop the action plan that ends up implementing. And then both parties have a responsibility really with the monitoring, right? The administration is doing a lot of monitoring of the action plan. Is it working? Do we need to tweak? And the school committee is also monitoring that plan with the same question of, is this effective? Is this getting us where we want to go? And some of the superintendent evaluation then is also sort of tied to, is that plan moving forward? That all make sense?
That's what we do.
Yep. Yeah.
I just see it was different.
No, not at all, not at all. Any other questions? So, pop quiz. How many bosses does the superintendent have?
Depend how many school committee members there are.
One. It's the school committee as a whole that is the body that is giving direction to the superintendent. Lots of, like you said, can have lots of brains, right? Lots of heads. Sometimes we think of Medusa, right? As, it's the full committee in a properly posted meeting that has the authority to give direction to the superintendent. Make sense? Oh, come on, Jeff. Does it make sense?
I purposely didn't raise my hand to ask to be recognized. I scrunched my face.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, since you asked. In a perfect world, yes. But the problem is that superintendents, especially because school committees evolve, they change. Every election year you can have a different, frequently find themselves counting votes, right?
Right, but it's the outcome of that vote that gives direction.
Right, but imagine the superintendent looking at a 3-2 vote and saying, I wonder if that 3-2 vote is going to become 2-3 the next time that issue is brought forward. So I agree with that. In a perfect world, that's exactly the way it is. But school committees are very imperfect, dynamic bodies, and I would love for that to be a simple statement. But unfortunately, in the real world, it just isn't.
Do you want to add anything to
So,
that?
yeah,
I heard a sigh over there, so I'm gonna.
I think the point of this slide is that I answer to the body, not to the individual. I've had school committee members call me and tell me what to do, not here, obviously.
Yeah.
Not understanding that it's the collective body that has to make the decision. And sure, there's politics involved. If it's a close vote, it can go one way or the other, and that's the way the system is, I think, intentionally built, because you can have that push and pull and hopefully land on the right decision.
And I don't know if I have to be
Go ahead.
recognized, but I mean, isn't kind of the point of something like this to make sure that we don't have many contentious votes, that we all do kind of, I mean, for example, we all knew to look to you for a comment when it turned to that. We all kind of went, so we knew. So I mean, as we get along, part of what she was saying earlier about our, our connection and our, how well we work together is going to be
But
how
we, but
work
we,
as a school committee.
right, but
Our
we can,
relationships
we
matter.
can work together well and still disagree.
Oh, absolutely.
There's
yeah.
going to be cases where we disagree on issues, but we can still have that trust and collaboration and agree
Yeah,
to
no,
disagree.
Absolutely, but I'm saying that, I mean, I realize this is kind of a blanket statement, and yes, like you said, in a perfect world, it would apply everywhere. I think that the point of meetings like this is to make it so that we get closer to that, so that we can, have, of course, we will disagree, but maybe have less disagreements, or at least know how to resolve those disagreements, so that we don't have to have our superintendent wondering, is it gonna be a 3-2 vote next time when it was 2-3 this time? So I think it's a good thing that we're working all together and doing something like this. Can we agree on that?
Okay. So how much authority does an individual member have?
0.
Right, none, because it's the body that has the authority. You might say influence or impact, right, but authority lies with the body.
I appreciate the distinction.
Yep. So there's also a difference, leading from that last slide, into being an individual member and being the body, the school committee, right? So as an individual member outside of that properly posted meeting with a quorum present, you have no greater power than any other qualified voter. You are expected to contribute, to come to meetings prepared, to contribute to the discussion, to ask those hard questions. I think we all know, first of all, the hard questions need to be asked. Secondly, that sometimes having those good discussions can change minds, right? Coming in with an open mind and being ready to listen to different viewpoints. And asking those critical questions, but then understanding that once the vote is taken, whether it's 3-2 or 2-3 or whatever it is, that is the will of the committee, and that even if you were on the minority side, you support the vote, which doesn't mean changing your mind, but it does mean that you allow that decision to move forward without getting in the way of it. And of course, everyone be there dedicated to the job on behalf of students. Then the committee as a whole, you're using your power, right, to make the official decisions. You're governing through policy. You have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure the financial resources are used appropriately, which got demonstrated tonight, right? Engaging the community in the work of the schools, supporting that relationship, and you are the employer of record on any collective bargaining agreements that exist. Questions? So we know when we talk about that effective governance team, hopefully we may be talking about the ideal, but what you want to work towards that, right? You want to try and be that effective team. that there is an understanding that there are different but complementary roles that the members of the team have, the superintendent and the school committee. That you have some discussions, like hopefully we'll have tonight, on agreement on how you're going to operate and communicate. So hopefully you have some of those discussions, understand, and then you can dig into the work, right? So you're not asking, how do we work together? You're saying, oh, we know how we work together, now let's dig into the work. You're focusing the work at the committee level on policy and the goals. Everyone needs to be willing to put in the time needed. I worked with a committee last night that said, maybe we're not big enough because there's too much to do and we don't have enough time. That the business meetings are efficient, and that there's good, frequent informal conversation, not meaning subverting the open meeting law, but nights like this evening, or times when you have like a workshop where it's not necessarily that strict formal business meeting, and you can maybe take a topic and dig into it and have some of those meaty discussions. And obviously that presence of trust and respect amongst everyone on the team. And we know when that's all in place, when that good working relationship is there, it really engenders the confidence of the staff and the community, right? Everybody's kind of looking to the top, and when they see, even when there are disagreements, that people are trying to work effectively together, there's that sense of things are stable. On the part of the staff, they feel like, okay, I understand these initiatives, I understand they're going forward, they're not going to change tomorrow because of some conflict that's happening at the top. They are putting their energy more into the job. I think we all know when there's conflict, that's where your energy is going, not into doing the work. And you have the confidence of the community. When the community sees things operating well at the top, they're far more likely to feel ready to support what you're asking for. One of the things I read in some of the reading that I did at one point was that, particularly for people who do not have students in the school, they believe the schools are operating the way they see the board operating, right? So if they see that the board is dysfunctional, they think the schools aren't operating well. So much less likely to be supportive of the things that you're asking about. Superintendent changes are costly, disruptive, and can hinder progress. So the upshot of all this is you want to make sure, even when that relationship is humming along well, that you're nurturing it and continuing to work on it and not just taking it for granted. Making sense?
I would just point out in agreement that some people might say that in 2022, we have reached, for the moment, a nadir in trust of the public of bodies of authority, whether it's Congress, whether it's the state legislature, whether it's a school committee, whether it's the Board of Selectmen. People simply don't trust authority. And the more we demonstrate dysfunction, the more reason we give them to distrust us. So I think it's absolutely something we should aspire to, is to show how well we can function, to hopefully boost the level of trust that people have, at least in this body.
I think it's also important that the community and how we display our ability to respectfully disagree with each other in our meetings, and know that we can all vote independently and then have the collective come out as the reflection of the body, whichever ends up being the majority. But that, in watching so many school committee meetings throughout the rest of the country over the last couple of years, given the sign of the times, given the different views regarding the pandemic and education and the roles and of various other governing bodies, I think that we as a school committee have done a fantastic job in not letting things get contentious. I think I view us as a pretty good example of how we can have differing opinions and still have respect for one another and work cohesively together. I think we have done an amazing job given the last couple of years and the changes. Our district has had some drastic changes, and I think I give us a lot of credit as a body for that, and I hope that other committees look to more functional committees instead of, you know, the ones that people are watching, the ones with the contentiousness and the fighting and the police having to escort people out. So I'm very grateful that our community hasn't allowed that to infiltrate our meetings or our committee.
As someone once said, the planes that land don't make the news. So, so that's sort of like big picture theoretical based on research, you know, so forth. As a Massachusetts school committee, you are considered the municipal legislature for schools with some specific roles. I'm not going to go into these in a lot of detail, but just sort of point them out. You have the responsibility for establishing educational goals. That doesn't mean the school committee creates the goals. You're working with the superintendent and the administration to make sure that there are goals established. Sort of what you were asking about about the strategic plan. That's definitely needs to be a collaborative effort. You enact the policies. You have your policy manual, right? You approve and monitor the budget. Hire and evaluate the superintendent, and I'm guessing that maybe Brendan, you don't know that there are certain other positions that you have sort of advice and consent, but you probably know, those of you who have been on for a bit know that there are other that you have advice and consent on. And then again, you are the employer of record on collective bargaining agreements. So any questions on that? So what I really want to dig into, I know you guys don't want to be here all night, so it's hot, and you've already had busy days, I think all of you, I have. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about establishing some of those norms or protocols that they have to be tailored to you. Like, I can't come in with a list, even though I'll show you some examples in a bit, of, you know, this is how you should work, follow these, and it will all be great. This team has to figure out how you're going to work together effectively. So I'm going to do things maybe a little bit more expedited than I might do if I had like 3.5 hours to work with all of you. I'm going to pass out our issues worksheet, and we can go through this together. The issues worksheet is broken up into before meetings, at meetings, and between meetings. And there are issues that tend to come up in communication or operations, and just sort of to build an understanding among this group of how does it work now? Is it effective? Is there things you might want to change? Matt coming in saying, well, I have some ideas about, how I think this should work effectively, so let's talk it out if it might be different than the practice that's been in place with your prior superintendent. That make sense? Mm-hmm. Let me pass these out then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll give you just a second we'll start with the before meetings. It's a short section, so you shouldn't need too much time to read what's on there. Is there anything that is on that short list where you want to talk about how it works now, how it might work better than it works now, how you think it's effectively working now? And I have to say that sometimes the question that comes up in developing and placing items on the agenda, a newer member of the committee will say, I have no idea how the agenda gets put together. It just lands in my inbox. So that's a fair question, too.
Well, and as incoming chair, I had that question myself in terms of what is the process, and especially working with the new superintendent now. We've met to discuss that a little bit, but I think it's helpful for the whole committee to hear what that process is.
Who does have the final say of what the agenda looks like?
Generally, it's the chair. The chair is considered the servant of the assembly, not the master, right? And it's also the school committee's meeting. It's not the superintendent's meeting, right? It's the school committee's meeting. So hopefully that's collaborative, right? The superintendent's saying, you know, these are the things we think we need to address. School committee chair is often bringing maybe issues that members want to see on the agenda, or so forth, but does that answer your question?
It does, and I ask that because I've had situations where a member was requesting an agenda item, and the chair did not want to put the agenda item on the agenda, and I would sometimes get stuck in the middle, where one member's calling me, tell her to put it on the agenda, and, it's an uncomfortable position.
Yeah, yeah. So, and, the chair's the servant of the assembly, not the master, is one of our lines, but, the body can always override the chair, too, right? That a member who wants something on the agenda when the chair said no can bring it to the full committee and ask that it be on an agenda.
Agreed, but when does that overruling occur? Does it occur during the meeting?
It would have to.
Exactly.
Yep,
So,
But to get it put on a future agenda?
yep,
right, so it seems to me that, and I've been chair multiple times, it was always a negotiation, a peaceful,
yep,
calm negotiation. A member comes to me and says, I'd really love to have this on the agenda. My reaction to that is, okay, what are the implications of putting it on the agenda? How does the superintendent feel? It's because it inevitably has some impact on the superintendent. The superintendent wants to be prepared for that, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it's best put on the next meeting, et cetera, et cetera. But it can be a very constructive negotiation.
oh, absolutely.
To me,
Yep,
if it gets to the point of the chair being overruled by the body, that's a really negative situation in the middle of a meeting and to be avoided.
yep, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't
I
happen
agree.
often, it's just,
But
it's
I
what
also-
Robert's rule says, right?
I also agree with our superintendent. Any member who goes to the superintendent and says, argue to put this on the agenda because the chair doesn't want it there, that's also a sign of dysfunction. It means
Yep.
the member and the chair can't talk it out.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
And I'm easy to talk with, everybody.
Well,
Joyce?
I was just going to say, I mean, I've served as chair, probably not as many times as Jeff, but I can't think of any time where there's ever been anything that someone asked to be on the agenda that didn't get on the agenda. It was, yeah.
The times that I've seen the conflict is often, when is it appropriate? Is it, does it really need to be at the very next meeting? Or because there's already 42 things on the agenda at the next meeting? Or, or for other reasons? Or, in 2 meetings, I know we're going to be discussing this topic that slides right into. Can't it wait until, and sometimes members get kind of insistent, no, it's got to be right away, right? So that's
Hopefully
where I've seen the conflict.
understood, but I agree with Joyce. I think it's pretty rare.
Yep. Well, depends on the committee.
Yes, it does.
Again, we're a shining example.
Joyce?
So we also rely on Jamie, right, for the routine items that are annual items or monthly items, whatever they may be, for those to go on the agenda. And usually the chair is aware of those. And maybe if members were made aware of those also, maybe that would be helpful, just for the very routine items, well, when is that coming up? When, I hope we talk about that. Oh, it's coming up in April. Okay, that's when we're going to talk about it. So that might be something that would be helpful.
That's a very good point, because when we talk, a lot of times when we're talking about goal setting and planning, we talk about, you can make a year-long agenda. You have your goals, when are you going to get the report outs, right? And I'll say, I'll mention year-long agenda, and someone will say, oh, we have that. And the chair and the superintendent might say, well, we have that. And the rest of the committee will kind of look at them and say, well, can you share it? So very often that template does exist, and you're right, sharing it sometimes with the whole membership can be helpful. understanding it's always a draft, right? Things are gonna come up and things are gonna get placed differently depending on circumstance sometimes, but
Right. And some of the things like budget, those are already noted on the meeting schedule for the year, so, that we see ahead of time.
But I do think that's something like, we've just started talking, actually over the summer about what that year-long might look like, and we can, once, we haven't decided yet, but we can certainly share that with everybody once we get that figured out.
I have another question. The meeting, if a meeting is posted, obviously 48 hours prior, within that 48 hours, after it's posted, leading up to the meeting, can that agenda change?
yes,
How
it can.
it change?
You would change the posting.
Can you add agenda items
Yep.
within the 48 hours? You can.
Yes, you can. Yep.
I didn't
Yes.
know that.
I had two questions, actually. You were talking about, and this might be somewhat semantics, but if, someone wanted to have an item put on the agenda, went to the chair, and the chair said no, by talking to individual members, if I called Jeff up and said, I really want to get this, let's go after Kevin and let's get it on there, wouldn't that be a violation of the open meeting law by
That's why
doing
Jeff
that?
said, where would that discussion take place? Would
Yeah.
have to take place at a meeting.
Yeah, we couldn't talk about it
Right.
outside of the meeting.
Right.
And
Right.
the other thing I noticed, I might be skipping ahead here to the part about between meetings. It says individual members requesting information from, directly from staff, or, individual members requesting action from staff. We don't have the authority or power to do that, do we? At all?
You do not, but that doesn't mean in some places it's not an issue.
Okay. I understand.
These are often the reasons we get phone calls at the office. And also, sometimes when I'm working with committees, topics tend to come up multiple times and then they kind of get on the list.
Gotcha.
So I guess, given that you now have a new superintendent who's starting and planning the meetings and needs to get material to you, do you have clear expectations about how questions get answered if you have questions before the meeting and when you get the supporting material?
So supporting materials come out the Monday before the meeting. But we should discuss questions, like if there are questions that individuals say have, like, and what new superintendent would like for that. Would you want that to come from the chair, or would you like people to feel comfortable to be able to call you with an individual question prior to a meeting? How would you, what would you like to see for that?
I'm okay with the school committee calling me, individual members calling me for information.
Well, like today, I had a question,
Right.
so I asked Kevin if I could call Kristen.
Which
Was that the?
it's just a kind of I think a courtesy,
a
so I at
courtesy,
least
yeah,
know what's going on also. So I think if you are going to call Matt for a question, or Andrea, whoever might want to call, that maybe just as a courtesy, let me know you had that question, just so I can be aware.
So I have a question regarding that. So are you just to notify the chair that you have a question and that you plan to ask it? Or do you, in situations, does that question have to be disclosed if you're looking for clarification and not necessarily comfortable sharing the nature of the question, but letting them know that you're reaching out to communicate?
So if it's a question about, about meeting material,
Well, I'm just more of like a blanket school
Yeah.
committee statement, because everything, goes through the chair for the most part, you know what I mean, like as the servant or whatever.
Yeah,
So like,
yeah.
say you do have a question to ask, like, but as, just as a, because I don't think, there's nothing in writing anywhere in our policy, so I'm just asking from a mask standpoint, if someone on the committee had a question for, it wasn't necessarily agenda item. It
Yeah.
could be regarding executive session material, could be regarding, anything other. Would that person, do you have to disclose what the nature of your question to the chair, or just notify the chair that you're looking to reach out to a person to ask a question? Just, I'm giving you a heads up, I would like to ask a question of so-and-so, I'm just not comfortable
so
letting you know the
I'm gonna
question.
defer a little bit to Matt on this, because part of what we often talk about is that you know, that you, you only have one employee. So, and a lot of times, the superintendent kind of needs to know the questions that are being asked, and particularly if it's something that takes a lot of staff time, might want to know that that question is out there. So I guess my question would be, is it just the chair, or if you wanted to call a principal or the business manager or the SPED director, should that go through the chair or should that go through the superintendent?
So my preference would be that the school committee call me and explain their question, and we'll discuss how to get the answer. I'm not opposed to a school committee member speaking with a principal, but I would ask that the school committee call me first. That's how, for the exact reason that you're saying, that there can be miscommunication and things happening that I'm not aware of that can come back and create problems later.
So, you know, in order for the superintendent to effectively run the district, they kind of have to know what's going on in the district, so.
No, understandable.
Is that
and-
answering your question?
No,
or-
so
okay.
more, not necessarily in regards to anything specific, because we've had an interesting few years, right? So, as a committee, just put it out there, it's been interesting. So like, if we would have had to, as a committee member, had a question for, on the town side of things where things are overlapping, not staff related, student related, but in reaching out to the district attorney, or reaching out to the human resources and things of that nature, would you alert the chair, let them know, I plan to speak to this person, I'm giving you the heads up in those instances?
So how has it been handled in the past?
We don't have a written policy,
Okay.
so that's why I'm asking.
Well, so if you don't have a policy, how has it been handled in the past? What's been the sort of, the way it works? So I'm thinking there's two separate answers here, because generally access to the attorney is through the chair, and part of the reason for that is just to control the expenses, right? So that, or so that the attorney isn't answering the same question multiple times, or answering questions that really aren't school committee related questions for an individual member. So I would say if you needed to reach out to the attorney, that no, you would probably disclose as little as possible to anyone else, right? I think it would probably, so the human resource director question, I would say that's a question that you would go through the superintendent, not necessarily the chair.
Okay, I'm just,
Yeah.
just because we have no policy in
Yeah.
place, and I'm now going to be the chair of the policy review, so I didn't know if you knew of other districts that had a policy. Is it something we should outline just for clarity, or
Yeah, I mean,
a blanket of
usually.
different subsects of chain of command if you
Yeah.
have a question
So,
for the chair?
I mean, usually we think of that more as in protocol rather than trying to embed it very specifically in policy. Part of the, what about this situation, what about that? We could talk all night about what about this situation and what about that situation. And we won't hit all the different situations that you can run into. So part of it is just sort of some general guidelines, and then you get a sense of, how we work and what would be acceptable. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Just on the attorney, certainly past practice has been, and I believe the attorney even practices this, which is the attorney will not take a call from an individual school committee member, but only from the chair, unless the chair has said to the attorney, feel free to call so-and-so or take a call, et cetera. So
Yep.
it is, and I think there's lots of good reasons for that, including cost.
Yep.
But I have a more generic thing, and I admit that this goes way back, even beyond my school committee days, which is to say, I feel it's critically important that I have interactions with people who are below the superintendent in the org chart. Because that's the only way I get a comfort level about your organization. I mean, if I just can't get comfortable only interacting with the superintendent. But I have a rule as it applies to those interactions, which is to say, if I run into Kristen or Bonnie or Joan, okay, I feel very comfortable, and I want you to feel comfortable with me asking them questions that don't require them to do any work at all to answer the questions. On the other hand, I would never say, would you please do the following, okay? Because that's directing one of your employees. So I draw a very bright line between asking the question, so I have a sense of what the answer is and whether they even have the answer to a question they should have an answer to, and asking them to do something. And if that question, if I make a mistake and that question causes them to have to do some work, then I hope they will say, whoa, okay, that's going to require some effort, at which point I will back off and say, no, that's asking you to do something, and I don't want you to do it. So my question to both of you is, are you, either one of you, uncomfortable with this philosophy of mine? And it's it's probably a 30-year philosophy. So it goes way back before school committees.
I'm curious about you said asking them questions. What kinds of questions?
What kind of questions?
Were you going on vacation this year?
No.
Okay.
Wouldn't think that's personal. Okay. What kind of questions? How's turnover been? That's a really important question. Mm-hmm. They won't have to do any work. I will make sure that I'm not asking for a number, okay? I just want or even more generally, are things going well, okay? But I don't want a superficial answer, which is to say, if they're not going well, I want them to trust me that I care, and if things aren't going well, they'll tell me, we're struggling. Now, you might say, I'd like to hear that they're struggling before you hear that they're struggling. Well, that's their problem, or your problem. I don't expect to be the first to know that they're struggling, okay? But if they are struggling, I want them to feel they can tell me they're struggling.
That's a tough one, Jeff. So, I don't have any problem with you speaking with a staff member. I would, if you have a concern after a discussion with a staff member, I would ask that you call me with the concern.
Done. No problem.
Don't worry, he will.
No problem at all. On the other hand, and this is a gray area, I can't imagine, it's happened. I can imagine, and it's happened, where someone has said, confidentially, and they've just told me something that they think I need to know. Mm-hmm. Then I struggle with that, because on the one hand, I want to honor the confidence, in which case, if they say confidentially, I may literally say, whoa, okay, I'm not sure I can guarantee the confidentiality, because it may be something that I think you need to know. So that's an area that, look, we're trying to be honest in these discussions, mm-hmm. right? That this is me, trying to do my governance job, which is to say, I want to get a sense of how well you're managing, okay? And I may get, this is great, okay? Or I may, over the last 12 years, I haven't always been confident in the information I've gotten. But you're right, I have an obligation to tell you when I hear something that's disturbing, that I feel you should know. And I will not accept in confidence if I can't guarantee that confidence. And most of the time I can't, because the tension will always be there should you know that.
I guess, my-
I would worry you would be putting staff members in a tough
In
situation.
which case, they won't talk to me.
I agree with Dorothy because you're a school committee member. And I don't know, I just, it
I have
doesn't
no-
feel,
But I am a school committee member with no authority. Dorothy told you.
yeah, well,
But you have power even if you don't have authority.
50 years ago, I took a course on the difference between power and authority. It stuck with me. You're 100% right. And you can have a great position and have all sorts of authority and be impotent. So you're right. The real issue is power, not authority.
I don't think it's a good idea for, my opinion, for a school committee member to go around asking staff members
Taking
about how things are going. I mean, you'll probably get multiple different answers. There's lots of perspectives. There'll be people that love the superintendent. There'll be people who hate the superintendent. Or
Not
they're
naive.
not, they love their job, they hate their job, we're doing great, we're not doing great. I don't know. It feels funny to me.
I understand. That's why I brought it up.
I think the school committee needs to look at the big picture and not look for little pieces of information. Certainly that it's gonna come to you. Pieces of information are going to come to you, just because you're a school committee member. But I think that this process that we have in place is designed to allow you to look at the big picture. Using all the things that Dorothy talked about before, data and measures and, goals, and using that to look at the big picture, and are we moving forward as a district? Are we doing good work for our students overall?
I don't want to take any more time.
Okay. Do we feel there was any resolution there? April?
I think there is I don't know if fine line or delicate balance is the right word to say, because not only are we school committee members, but a majority of us are also, we're community members involved in other community organizations, almost all of us, working in the community. And I think that because we are visible to the community, that there are people that will offer up information, whether we ask for it or not. And I think that part of us being voted into position is the trust that the community has in us to do a job that they feel needs to be done. And I think that they could view, or they do view, I think, that, they can come to us if they have a concern. And I think that where the line comes in with Jeff's confidentiality or, of where things need to be directed, I think that we just need to, as delicately as possible, steer them through the chain of command before they get, because most people, they see us, they think, I need to unload all of my issues and problems with the district on you because you're in front of me right now. Instead of saying, well, have you spoken to the principal, going through the chain of command? Did you send Matt an email and ask the superintendent for help? Or, I think guiding them to, if you do have an issue, where it needs to go, and then even utilizing information to help with those goals. So if someone's coming to you confidentiality or on a coworker or a friend or at another thing, and you hear something, I think utilizing that information to say, is this being done, or asking questions like, is there truth to this? And what can we do to fix or address or change the course if it's something that needs to, or take it for what it is? Is this somebody who's in their own moment of frustration and they just need an ear to vent it to, and then, you know, move it along, and then, or is this something, a bigger picture item that does need to be presented to Matt or the rest of the committee? And just give them the correct chain of command.
Yep, so, yeah, chain of command is important, helping them get to where they need to get the issue resolved or the questions answered. You know, we spend a lot of time working with school committees on what are your roles and responsibilities. The people that really don't know the roles and responsibilities are like the entire rest of the community, who think that you have more power and authority than you actually have, right, to get things done.
That's with every board in town.
Yep. Yep, so, you know, but understanding sometimes you hear things, right, and there may be threads that you hear, and that becomes something to move, you know, that may be something to discuss with Matt, or becomes a topic at a school committee meeting. So you're right, I mean, you always have that hat on, whether you think you've taken it off or not for other people. And, you know, being able to balance that, how do I get people where they can get their issue resolved, or gosh, this sounds like an issue that really is within our purview and maybe we should be talking about and addressing. Does that make sense?
I have one. What about, we were talking about different roles that we all have. I'm a parent of a student that has special needs. So when I'm dealing with, you know, his teachers and stuff like that, I kind of don't want them to be thinking, well, he's on the school committee, I have to acquiesce to whatever he says, or vice versa. You know, if especially when budgets come up and they're gonna think, oh, my pay is gonna be tied to whether or not I give his kid an A or something like that. What's my best practice is to kind of differentiate when I'm wearing my parent hat. as
Be
opposed to when I'm wearing my
explicit,
school
be
committee hat.
explicit. I'm here today as a parent, not as a school committee member.
What if I want to use my authority to get, no, I'm just kidding.
No, you never lose your ability to advocate. You never lose that role as a parent and the ability to advocate for your own child, right? But being clear that, you know, I'm in my parent role, not my school committee role. Then that can be very helpful.
And I've done that because I have a kid currently in the district too, and for the last 3, we have a very respectful group of teachers and principals and things, so when they know I'm there as a parent, they know I'm there as a parent, and when they know I'm there as a school committee member, they like me better, but they don't like me as much as a parent, probably, because I'm a little pushy.
I've yet to have a problem. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I ran for office, is because I've heard other parents say, oh, you know, my kid has special needs and has such a hard time. I've had nothing but wonderful experiences with my son's education at Wareham, from kindergarten on. So, I mean, that's why I love going to parent-teacher meetings, because it works out well. I just wouldn't want that to change now that I'm on the school committee, for, you know, them to feel differently about it, and I wouldn't want to feel like, you know, if I say this, it's going to, you know, they're not sure what hat I'm wearing, basically.
Yeah.
I've never experienced that in the district,
issue
so,
with it, but-
nope.
Okay. Did we take care of before meetings? We've been sort of melding it, which is absolutely fine. I'm kind of also trying to keep my eye on the clock here in this discussion. I think we've gone into some of the between meeting things that are on the list, but can we just take a few minutes to focus at some of the at meeting, which I think we've kind of discussed some as well. Yeah.
So one of the things that I have, and it's not necessarily an issue with the at meetings, and I know that timeliness is always an issue, but we've always set the agenda where our public participation is at the beginning of a meeting. And I find it, especially, we don't have a lot, let's just say that. We're not usually, unless there's a special event or a hot button agenda item, most people are watching this at home, right? They're not participating. We were doing hybrid kind of Zoom things for a brief period of time with kind of coming back out of COVID. It's hard for me when people are coming and there's something that's maybe on the agenda at the end of a meeting to have that public participation where people are speaking to that item at the beginning of that meeting, or not speaking to those specific agenda items. And I know that there are other committees that have sub-separate sections of their meeting where they'll have public participation or community questions, or however you want to put it. so that it's like, okay, well, at this time, we'll have anything that people want to address from the first 3 agenda items. Are there anyone that wants to speak out? You know what I mean? Like, so it's a little bit more connected. I feel like if it's being spoken to, the point, before we've discussed it as a body on the agenda, I find that it's difficult for me to be able to kind of keep tying everything together. And I have ADHD, so it's probably my own brain that can't just do that. But I think that, you know, in order to feel, I think part of that, kind of build that community trust and that sort of connection, I think it would be, in my opinion, I don't know whether or not the rest of the committee agrees with me or not. I mean, time limits, absolutely, but, you know, to sort of have it mixed throughout the meeting based on different agended items.
So part of the reason why, in general, as a practice, we sort of say, you know, that to keep it at the beginning or keep it at one public comment, wherever you put it, is to remember that this is a meeting in public, not with the public. And with that sort of, you know, sort of constantly stopping, then it becomes more of a meeting with the public, which isn't really, you're meeting in public, you're doing your business in public.
Okay.
You know, and I think sometimes the logic or the value of having public comment first, and they may be commenting on things on the agenda, they may have questions that then can be answered in the presentation on that agenda item, or it gives you an opportunity to take that input into consideration as you're having your discussion on the item.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep.
It does say in our policy manual that I looked up today, any member of the public wishing to make a brief statement of general concern on an agenda item may request permission from the chair. Any such statement shall be addressed to the chair. The public will be recognized at the discretion of the chair. So within our policy, if someone wanted to requested that, it could be up to me as the
Yep.
chair to say, yes, we'll take it, or no, you had your chance in public. So it is there as an opportunity by our own policy right now.
And, you know, sometimes you may make an exception to the public comment at the beginning if it is like a big meaty topic and you know there's the people here on it, you know, to talk about it, or to that, where you may have the presentation and your discussion and then a brief public comment, which you know, you may keep to a shorter time period or whatever. So you can always, I mean, you can always make those adjustments as seems to fit. But as a general rule, I think keeping it as one comment period with a limited time and with speaking time limits makes a lot of sense.
And would you say it's best practice not to respond to
Yes,
public comment?
Yeah.
You hear it, you listen to it. If maybe in new business you wanted to address some factual error or something,
Yeah.
you could, but in the moment you probably
Right.
shouldn't, correct?
so for a couple reasons, if you can't pick and choose, right? If you're gonna respond to one person, you can't tell another person, oh, it's our policy not to respond, right? You've set that, right? So you need to be consistent in the way you do it. Someone may have a question or concern, you're not ready. Nobody's ready to address it because you didn't know it was coming. So you're going to get into a discussion or a back and forth that nobody's really ready to have. The superintendent may hear something in there that says, you know, I need to do some work or investigation or talk to someone else on my administration to get some clarity about what is being brought up. So you don't want it to kind of land at the table there and not be able to address it.
Joyce?
I would just say, when it comes to routine agenda items, not the things that we wouldn't, you know, someone who's coming with a personal complaint or, I think we have an opportunity to share more information with the public prior to meetings than maybe we've been sharing in the past. And that alone could answer some questions that people have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Anything else that you see on the list? I'm not going to necessarily read through the whole list. Sometimes I get like diagrams on the back of the sheet with how people wish the layout was, and it's basically what you have. So,
yeah.
Just one question on Zoom. Is
Yep.
there a decision by the state, or has a decision been made already? Do we have to allow Zoom access? Like, if people want to make public comments,
you don't have to allow it.
Okay.
You can.
You-
I mean,
okay.
that hybrid meeting structure, or really the open meeting law part of that is more about the committee itself and whether you're meeting in person or whether you're meeting remotely. But if you're meeting in person and, that meeting is open and accessible, you do not have to allow the Zoom as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
A lot of places are kind of liking it,
Mhm.
but it's not a requirement.
Okay.
Well, in some instances, if it was voted in their town, meeting to have open accessibility to certain meetings, I believe that happened with our select board.
So that was prior to COVID? that
I
the
think it was a result of COVID that they voted, I want to say it was a vote there was something where someone had petitioned the state to have access to their meetings remotely going forward. If I might be, do you guys know what I'm talking about?
I think I remember hearing something.
For the selectmen meetings, I believe that they have accessibility to the public on Zoom for all of their meetings.
Mhm.
So that was never in place for us as a public body, but
It was. We had several meetings that were hybrid, where WCTV, we were all in person, and WCTV had a Zoom link open, and it was a lot of work for them to establish that, and no one came on. So eventually, we stopped doing that, and it was my understanding that we weren't required to do that, but we did do that for many meetings.
no, I remember that we did, but
Oh, I
I
thought you
wasn't,
just said that we
no,
didn't do it.
I meant that we didn't I don't think we were under whatever that came down from the state where they were told they kind of had to, going forward, have that accessibility for people.
I've never heard of that requirement, I mean, there's sort of, if you can, if someone is the accessibility would come into play if it was an issue of, the name of the law is going to escape me, not IDEA, American with Disabilities Act, right? That is, so you're looking at the accessibility issue from that standpoint, not from the public would like to have it standpoint. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Anything else? Do you have any, did you look at the list and think, oh, I haven't been to any meetings, this is my first one, how does it work here?
Well, length of meetings is always I think that after a couple hours, people are checked out. But one thing I did circle was school visits. And I think back to your question, Jeff, about finding out what's going on in the district. I think that's a great way for school committee members to see what's going on and learn what's going on. Is, set up a time to maybe go into the school and have the principal take you around and ask lots of questions then, see the program, see what's going on in the buildings, and you'll get a good idea, good feel for what's happening in the schools.
But
Are you
if you're-
ta-
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, are you talking about a group visit? The school committee, or just individual?
I was thinking individual.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I have a question for that, because previously, we had done, obviously well before COVID, that was, I think, normal. Would you prefer to be notified if we were going to, or notify as long as the managing body of that building, the principal is aware, hey, I have some time today. Would it be okay if I came down, you gave me if you have time to just kind of walk around, see how things are going? Or would you want to be notified about it, or just the governing, the manager of that particular location? As long as it didn't interfere with their day, and you said, hey, do you have time? And they're like, no, not today, but if you call me next week or whatever.
Right.
Would you rather be told first, or have us ask you permission before we decide, hey, you know what, I have a day off today, I'm gonna see if the principal of the elementary school will let me walk around?
I would like to know, yes.
Okay.
I just had one more question, something I noticed on here. It said, about handling email and communications from constituents. Am I required, if I get an email from a member of the community, and am I required to make it public, to share it with everybody? I mean, if it's
It's not
something-
I mean, it could become public. Do you have like a disclaimer on the bottom of your emails that said this is a public record? Yeah. So they should be aware that it could become public, but you're not required to make that public.
Okay.
So, and this, different committees sort of have different thoughts about, how does an email get shared amongst school committee members? How does it get responded to? So that might actually be a good
Well,
conversation.
That would be, because like if
Yeah.
someone sends us, 5 of us, a bus stop issue,
Yep.
who should respond?
Yep.
Or should we just forward to the superintendent and say, we're forwarding this to the
I
superintendent?
used to love the ones that came to the whole school committee and the superintendent, because I knew it was the superintendent's responsibility to answer the question. But, generally, the chair is the spokesperson, right? So it would, it would be the chair that would respond, not copying everybody, but you guys sort of having the confidence that the chair is responding. Sometimes on committees, people say, well, I want them to know that I saw it and read it and cared. So some people will say, well, I just want to respond, thank you for your email, you'll get a response from the chair, or, whatever, not to say nobody can respond except the chair. Sometimes
Right.
that's the protocols that people follow. This is like, if you know what one committee does, you know what one committee does. So it's really what does this body feel comfortable with?
I'm just a servant, you guys tell me.
Well, I'll say, I prefer that the chair responds instead of getting 5 different responses.
I did too when you were the chair. But I agree.
He's like, now it's my turn, I don't wanna.
I like what you said about just acknowledging that the person has sent an email, so they don't feel like, say it was me, like that I didn't
Yep.
see their email or care, but that the official reply would come from the chair. You don't like
And sometimes the chair will always start with the email, like, I'm responding on behalf, you sent to the entire committee, I'm responding on behalf of the entire committee. So it's not just that it looks like only the chair was the one who took the time to respond.
Right.
The problem with that is the chair may not know how the entire committee feels. The chair, number one, the entire committee may not have ever voted or expressed their opinion.
Well,
on
right,
that
the chair can
particular
only,
subject.
any one of you should only be responding with what a decision, that, you can't say, well, this is the way the committee feels if the committee has never discussed the issue, right?
Whether it's the chair or any member.
Right.
They cannot speak for the committee
Right.
unless the committee has actually spoken
Right, exactly,
on the subject.
yep.
Now, I respond directly, partly because I feel it's a responsibility. I am elected by the public, and the public should have access to me as a person, and I shouldn't have I'll dump that on Kevin, That's why Kevin got to be chair. He wanted to be chair. No, I'm kidding. He probably didn't want to be chair, but the bottom line is, I feel a responsibility. But when I communicate with a member of the public, I have a responsibility to make sure they understand this is just me expressing myself, and I'm not expressing on behalf of the committee. Now, it's probably a good idea to copy, the chair, or, so other people know what thoughts you've expressed. But bottom line, I think an elected official has a
You do.
responsibility.
You have the ability, certainly, yeah.
I would go further. I think responsibility not to ignore a member of the voting public.
So what does a voting member of the public do when they get responses that have 5 different opinions?
They rightfully conclude that the issue has not been addressed, and it's going to be an interesting subject when it is addressed.
Just out of curiosity, do most of the ones from the public, are they issues to address that are within the purview of the school committee, or are they asking questions that really, or have issues that really belong someplace else?
By the way, I shouldn't give the impression that I'm inundated.
Yep,
COVID, obviously,
Yep.
vaccinations, that produced far more interactions than probably in my entire prior 12 years.
Yep, I'm sure.
Okay? So and if they're not part of the purview of the committee, I'd be the first person to say to them, sorry, you need to check with your Board of Selectmen or your town administrator or whatever. It has nothing to do with the school committee, and I would be reluctant to express an opinion on which I didn't have any purview.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, Dorothy, you're right, though. Most of the emails, to my recollection, that we get as a group, if someone's unhappy, it's usually because they're unhappy with how the superintendent or a principal or someone has handled something, and that's not in our purview. You know, to change that decision or, you know, we're never gonna vote on that. Certainly, we can direct them in the right direction, or direct them back to the superintendent. But no, you're right, it's not most of the time in our purview.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, that's the same issue on social media. They're bringing up issues that are not in the school committee's purview to fix. And it causes a lot of angst and a lot of issues when it's unnecessary. Where they really should go is to the superintendent of schools or to the principal, or follow the chain of command, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we are all guilty of getting carried away with some of those messages. So I think they just need to be put in the right spot, right? Because it's the same as getting an email of unhappiness. I think not a very courageous way to express what you really need to have solved, right? And so I just think it's in here, and it needs to be, I think, addressed in some way.
It's a difficult issue. It's a gray area. And by that, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with anything you just said. But if the superintendent has made a decision, which he has the right to make, and based on the information you're getting, which is inevitably one-sided, right?
Glad you pointed that out.
Okay? It doesn't make sense, okay? I think it's my responsibility to say to the superintendent, I got this email. Help me make sense of this so that I don't have a biased view of that issue based on incomplete information. So if I said to this person, thank you for bringing this to my attention, I'll discuss it with the superintendent without any indication of how I feel about it. I think that's perfectly appropriate as compared to ignoring the person.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying ignore the people. I'm saying that there are ways to get it answered that you should be talking about. How does it get answered?
Right,
Yeah.
and we never talk about that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we don't, and I'd feel uncomfortable dumping it on the chair.
Then we're
And-
having
and
that
while
discussion.
I appreciate that, but I'm also willing to
Well,
respond.
except that the email may have been, sometimes, is from a person with whom I have a personal relationship. And that's an entirely different situation than a random member of the public. And then I might say, okay, Kevin should know about this, you know, what do you think, Kevin? And you may say, I'll take care of it.
April, you've had your hand up, so.
So I know that, and I know what Joyce is saying about most of the time, what we're getting is definitely most likely stuff that is beyond our control. My only thought is that if it was something that a community member had gone through the chain of command and they'd gone through the superintendent and they felt that either the appropriate steps were not taken by the superintendent or when it got up to that level, in my opinion, I view us as we are the overseer, the governing body of Matt. So, or just using you as an example, not saying this hasn't obviously happened yet, you're 5 seconds in. But, so for an example, someone had an issue, brought it up to the superintendent, felt that it was either not resolved or all of the considerations were not taken into consideration. So then they bring it to the school committee because they're like, well, we asked them to do this, this wasn't being done. Wouldn't I view that as that should get brought to the school committee's attention because we are the ones who are holding the superintendent accountable. So if you do have a community member or a student parent or something or an employee or somebody and they've gone through the appropriate chain. They've gone through whatever they needed to go. They get to, you know, the man behind the curtain, and they're still having an issue where they felt like it wasn't resolved or they weren't heard. Where does that line get drawn, where the school committee would then become involved with something that, you know what I mean, had the potential to get, you know,
Yeah.
go in a different direction,
Yeah.
or help that community person
So,
if they felt stalled
I
by
mean,
that?
I think Jeff made a good point when he said you don't always have the whole story, right? So some of that is if you're getting that as an individual, or if it's to the whole committee, Kevin or somebody going to the superintendent saying, you know, fill out the story, right? What are the issues here?
There's one fundamental problem with this, and that is, there are lots of things that are not in our purview, right? We're a governing body, we're not a management body.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many things on the superintendent's evaluation that are not in our purview. But we still have to make a judgment as
So
to
there
how
are-
well the superintendent has done on things that are not in our purview.
Well, there are less now if you're using the appropriate rubric.
We are.
Okay.
We are. Not that many less. We still have to make,
Half the number.
we still have to make a judgment about all those things.
No, you don't have to make a judgment about all those things, for one
I'm saying
thing.
all those things that are on the rubric.
No, you don't. You use focus indicators from that rubric that tie to the goals.
Which
You
we have
don't-
not done, but we
yeah.
need to do.
Okay,
Yeah.
then that's news to me.
Yep.
And maybe that's better, but I still think we've got a fundamental problem, and that is we're asked to make judgments as to the superintendent on things that are not part of our purview.
But if we, because eventually we're going to get to superintendent evaluation, maybe not today, but another workshop.
Yep.
If we agreed on some focus indicators as a committee with the superintendent, with our subcommittee on superintendent evaluation, that I'm looking at the members here, we might be able to limit it to those things that you think are in our
On that
purview.
committee?
You are on that committee.
Yep. So you do not need to evaluate on every single indicator. You pick the focus indicators that relate to the goals.
Okay, I hear you.
Yep.
Can I ask a question about the superintendent evaluation? So there's this I've been here 8 years, I'm going on my 9th year, and I've sat through some very uncomfortable meetings around this issue. And I would prefer, just as a person that likes to work hard and want to do great work for kids, to not have it be so uncomfortable in the future. So I'm wondering if there possibly is a way in which, publicly speaking, if there's a way that legally or policy-wise, conversations can be had and information can be shared, and that no one is surprised when they sit down to the person being evaluated
Yes.
is not like totally taken aback by the outcome of the evaluation, that there's this open dialogue between the committee and the superintendent, because I'm going to be loyal to the person that I work for. It's the right thing to do. So I'll be protective of that. And I'm being evaluated at the same time,
Yep.
right? Because all of those parts of that indicator, I am an active member in helping us get somewhere.
Yep.
So is there a way in which we might reconsider or think about how we practice it so that it's much kinder and less, more encouraging and positive?
So, part of the rationale behind this new evaluation model, right, that's been in place for about as long as you've
Couple
been
of
here,
years.
right?
Yeah.
Is that part of the rationale is it's supposed to help an educator grow in their practice,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
And when the superintendent's evaluation is done well, and you're paying attention to it all through the process, first of all, you should be communicating all through the process, not, this is the first time the superintendent learned that the members weren't happy with this,
Right.
right? That should
Yes.
not be happening. When it's done well, it can be a good tool to keep that collaboration in place, right? You should be agreeing on the goals, agreeing on the indicators, and having a discussion at the beginning, right, of how is this going to, how are we going to monitor this, right? What is the evidence you'll be able to show us? And I think that gets a little bit to what Jeff was talking about, right? Is that you're not flies on the wall, right? But, and when when there are things in place that you may not be, like, have that window into, then having that discussion at the beginning of the process to say, well, how can you show us that this is happening, right? And it gets the superintendent thinking about how do I show them this, right? What evidence can I gather for them? And it helps to the extent possible where you've got 5 evaluators and you're having that discussion about, do we really all understand what is expected out of the superintendent? You know, instead of not having that clarity and getting to the end and having some people have expectations about what was going to happen that didn't match other people's expectations or didn't match what the superintendent thought was the expectation. So I've seen it be a tool that helps committees and the superintendent collaborate on progress.
Which is a beautiful thing, because it happens in our evaluation system throughout the
Yep.
district. We
Right.
have we've taken a lot of time in building something that's quite dynamic,
Yeah.
right? So that's exciting. I don't think the same issues will happen in my short time with this now. It's a very different feeling.
Mhm.
So I don't anticipate that
Yeah.
there will be necessarily the same level of issues, but it would be really nice to take this as an opportunity to think about what we do and how to help Matt become, what the community and they envision.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's really the purpose, right, is to make sure that you've set the goals are being met, and you're doing that governance role of monitoring and evaluating progress.
So I feel like we've already taken the first step towards that, right? Because we've kind of been having this conversation for at least a couple of years, but we've never really taken action on it. But that's why we have a superintendent evaluation subcommittee. I mean, poor Matt, he hasn't even had an opportunity to, we haven't had the opportunity to talk about goals, but that is in my vision, that is the goal of this subcommittee, is to have this conversation, to enable this conversation throughout the year between the superintendent and the whole committee. So just like you said, there are no surprises.
Yep.
If there's something we don't think is being done well, he's gonna know about it way before evaluation. Or if there's something he's doing really well, that, he's gonna know all of that, and it's gonna give us all an opportunity to have that conversation. So that's why, yes.
Yeah, probably, go ahead.
Didn't we vote to, or with Glenn, I can't remember if there was a discussion when we were going through kind of all of the superintendent structures that we were looking at when we were interviewing and hiring Matt. Am I remembering incorrectly? I don't know if it was policy related, where we did change the presentation of the superintendent evaluation so that they weren't getting it when we sat down at a meeting? Didn't we choose to give it ahead of time?
They should not be getting it when you sit down at the meeting. They shouldn't.
That had been our policy, I believe, prior, and I believe that we changed,
And
correct?
Jamie can clarify that.
Done an executive session on April 28th,
That it was changed?
when we talked about that.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
you also changed the timetable,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So it's more in line with the contract year. Before, we were doing evaluations in October, and it just didn't make sense time-wise, so, yeah.
That answer your question? Okay. So I'm looking at the time. I had pretty strict instructions from Kevin not to keep you here too long. Is there anything else that we want to talk about on this sheet, or anything else? I go back to that, how do you handle the constituent emails type, and sometimes it turns into a big conversation, and I say, we're never going to sit here tonight and figure out all the different types of emails that come and how they get responded to. There's got to be some sort of, idea that things that are not within your purview get handed off to the right, to the right place to get handled, that the chair is never speaking out of turn and trying to commit the committee to things that the committee hasn't already committed itself to. So that may be something you want to just talk a little bit more about on occasion, to make sure people are happy with how things are flowing. other than that, I think some of the things we've talked about, I don't know if there's anything else that we didn't talk about that you feel you want clarity on as you start your work with the committee?
No, I think that what you've spoken about tonight has been great. I really like the graphic you had, the first Venn diagram that kind of said what the committee's roles and the superintendent, and it did show that there's an overlap because there is that gray area that it's, but I think that, that's important, and for me, whenever there's been a breakdown between the committee and the superintendent, it's been a communication issue, and I try very hard to communicate with the school committee what I feel you need to know, what it's good for you to know, and so it doesn't always avoid the challenges that come up, but sometimes I may over-communicate, but I think that's a key.
We'll take that.
Yeah, that's. So, and I think, this discussion shouldn't really end tonight, right? This should be sort of an ongoing discussion until you feel like you're falling into sort of patterns and protocols that make sense for you. So one of the things that we talk about as a best practice is developing a set of norms for the governance team that just lay out some basic things, short, like not a rule book of this is how you do everything, right? But just sort of some norms. I think, I've never run across an administrative team that met regularly that didn't have some sort of norms of working together. It's sort of the same idea. You work together all the time, so just some common expectations. So I'm going to give you some examples, but this is what always happens if I don't do enough advancing of my screen. Yeah, froze. Hang on. See if I can reach it. Oh, well, okay. So I'll just talk through them. So we talk about norms not as being policy and being because you want them to be flexible, and you can kind of go back and revisit them every once in a while and say they're working, they're not working, we need to change them. And short, right? Again, not a rule book, but a few basic agreements that help guide your work together. And cover items like, a general statement of purpose and objectives, how you're going to operate and communicate together, how you're going to conduct business, sort of an understanding of what is the scope of responsibilities of the different pieces of that leadership team, what are some basic standards of conduct, and what do you do? How do you stay on track with each other? How do you have that check-in and make sure you're staying on track? So what I'm going to hand out is, I always say, I can't do it for you, and then I hand you examples, right? But just, this has to be this group, right, that sort of forms them. So I have sort of a handout that's kind of basically what protocols cover the different topics that I just talked about with some random bullets. And then just a couple examples. One is from Melrose. Committees see this kind of like the format. They've taken some basic important topics and then put some bullets underneath. They also have done what we suggest is best practice, which is everybody signed them. They voted to adopt, these are our protocols, at least, until we review them again, right? And everybody signs and commits to it. And then the other one is Sudbury. Both of these stay to a page, right, without teeny tiny type. I've seen people say, well, we'll keep it to a page, but it's gonna be 8-point type, readable, open, right? And the thing that I wanna point out on the bottom of this is the dates where they reviewed them. So they don't become things that get tucked away. They don't become things where the team changes and you sort of dictate to the new team, this is how we work, but you have that discussion of we're a new team, so how does it work for us? So ideally, we would leave tonight with some thought about how might you guys put together some protocols for yourself in the future, and I'll hand out these examples, so.
While you're handing them, I was just wondering, is that done at a regularly scheduled meeting or another workshop meeting? or
It
when
can
would
be
that-
another workshop meeting. Sometimes it's just, sort of in that superintendent evaluation subcommittee. Sometimes I think of it as, what don't you want to see made, law sausages and putting together, like, it's sometimes easier for someone to sort of draft something and bring it back to the committee and say, this is a starting point, rather than starting with that blank page.
Yep.
Make sense?
So in 2018, we did have protocols. The Wareham School Committee, we did vote, and we did have them. But then in subsequent years, we didn't agree, so we didn't. So I'd be happy to dig out the one from 2018 and share that, if that's
Sure.
helpful.
I do remember, though, you bringing them to the table.
Right, after-
Every year to
Yes.
to just present something of that.
Yep, but
To
this
the
is a new
committee.
group, so hopefully,
Right.
we could go through it.
Well,
and-
I do remember, because I was one that was against it
I
going
wasn't
forward.
gonna say
I
that,
own
but
it.
yeah.
But it was some of the verbiage, so when it was presented, it wasn't presented that it was the possibility of a fluid or changing document. The way it was presented was like you're on a new committee, this is how we do things, and I didn't agree, so I didn't go, and I wasn't the only one that didn't agree, so I was uncomfortable with some of the language in it, so I didn't sign it.
She wasn't, but that's okay. I mean, this is a new group, so we'll start.
No, I said I wasn't the only
I'm
one.
thrilled that we are having this discussion and that we can do this again. I'm absolutely thrilled, so thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a look
And thank
at
you.
all of these and get some ideas
Yeah.
and see what we
Yeah.
can put together that
Yeah.
fits us.
Yeah, and like I say, simple, like, don't turn it into a rule, like, these are the rules you must follow. This is norms you agree on. So, I'm not gonna go into superintendent evaluation any more than I did tonight, given the time. Happy to come back, and do, it's probably the most frequent workshop that I do. And it's, some of the work, actually, I was part of a small team that put together the new rubric, for the simpler rubric. And I've done a lot of work with, the state on the model. And I feel like since it's come into effect, what was it, 2014, somewhere around there, that the new educator evaluation model, I think committees have gotten better at being able to use it effectively, have found it, once they've gotten accustomed to the process, it's become a less onerous process than it seemed at the beginning. And, people are sort of better at the goals and better at making it an effective tool to have that collaboration, and really help guide the district.
Mhm.
Do you have a question?
I do. So you mentioned the school committee setting goals. So I will set goals for myself that I will present to the school committee. We have a strategic plan in which has goals for the district, or we're developing goals using that plan. Our school improvement plans will have goals. The school committee will have am I correct in saying the school committee will have a separate set of goals just for the school committee?
So some committees do, some committees don't. And so I can get on my little goal soapbox too, if you want. So you talk about the strategic plan, right, and your goals and school improvement goals. You want that alignment, right? You want everything to sort of tie back to that strategic plan, all the oars rowing in the same direction. If the school committee has goals, the school committee needs to make sure those are things within your purview to do. It's not a way to sneak more goals onto the superintendent. It's things that are communication, or, things we're doing with the budget, or policy that we're looking at, or, things within your purview. I was looking at some goal, whenever I see a goal that a school committee has of, third grade MCAS scores will increase by 10%, I'm like, school committee cannot make third grade MCAS scores increase by 10%. You can help provide the resources for it to happen, but you can't do it. So setting that as one of your goals is not an appropriate goal for the school committee.
I don't think we have goals as a school committee.
Yeah,
Who
not
evaluates
everybody does.
No.
Who evaluates them?
The school committee would evaluate themselves.
Voters.
The voter, I guess. Right?
Or, you know, school committees, do you have a policy that says you will occasionally do a self-evaluation?
Not that I've ever seen.
Somewhere in section B, you don't have something that says?
I will look tonight, but I don't think so.
Many school committees do, that you'll do a periodic self-evaluation.
That could be
Which
our
is-
goal.
You know, which is
To find out if we have a goal?
Which is sort of, you know, how do we do better, right? Are we doing well? Are we fulfilling our function? Can we do better?
We just take a vote, declare ourselves high functioning.
There you go.
It's like when the only child says that they're the favorite kid, you know?
Can I circle back to the very beginning of your presentation where you said our ultimate goal should be to improve student achievement, and you made a point to say that's more than obviously MCAS scores. Does student achievement also go into extracurricular and athletics in your mind, or are you just talking about academics?
No, definitely not talking, you know, so if you think about, a lot of districts now have sort of a portrait of a graduate, right? And it's talking about more than academics. And we're talking not just about improving student achievement, but continuous improvement in student achievement. So how can you, as a committee, be doing a better and better job of serving your students, reacting to, you know, if you, as a committee, said, well, you know, we're never gonna look at technology because, you know, we're reading, writing, arithmetic. So, you know, looking at things that are coming up and changing the world that would help get your students more ready to enter whatever they enter after they exit from here, you're sort of looking at how can we do a better job of making sure our students are well-served and ready? Equitably. Yep, equity would be a big part of that, yep.
Thanks.
Any last questions for me?
I have lots of questions, but we'll wait for next time. I'm excited about doing a superintendent evaluation. And can I ask one question about that? Would you be able to guide us in the process? I know that I've seen other school committees that have superintendent evaluation subcommittees, and what that looks like with the superintendent, like on a yearly schedule. Is that something that you have experience with? Did you?
No.
Okay.
It was very disjointed.
Okay.
The Vineyard is 5 districts, and they could never really figure out who was supposed to evaluate, so they all evaluated, and it was challenging. It was very, very challenging, so.
But this is also somewhat time-sensitive, too, in order to, like, start that for
Yeah,
this year.
you should really be starting it.
We'd like to-
I mean, you gotta, hopefully you're giving the superintendent the maximum amount of time to accomplish the goals that you
Right.
set, right? And a lot of times when, you know, the superintendent evaluation subcommittee, generally, you're meeting to sort of coordinate that goal setting, right? And then you're probably not meeting again until you're getting ready to put together the composite. It's not a committee that was necessarily gonna have monthly meetings throughout the year.
Those are the kind of things we need to know.
Yeah.
Just what that might look like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay.
So we'll try to schedule that in the
All
near
right.
future, I guess.
Listen, slow down with the goals.
It's been really great, though.
So one of our lines about goals is if you have too many, you don't have any, right? So.
Well,
Okay.
I just
Thank
want to
you.
thank you for kind of creating this discussion. We don't often have time, it seems like we don't have time for these types of discussions, so we've made time tonight, and I want to thank you for giving us a lot of stuff to think about.
Okay, well, happy to do it, and happy to answer any questions you may have individually, or come back, or whatever you like.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, with that, I will take, I'm sorry, any other business?
Should we talk about when Dorothy would come back? I mean, can we?
Sure, I think it
'Cause
would be safer to
I agree
do that.
that, thank you, this has been terrific. And I think, I don't want it, my past experience has been that if you don't say, when are we gonna have you come back now, that it doesn't happen.
I'll grab my
agree.
calendar.
And Jamie, do you have our calendar out by any chance? I'm sure you do.
My memory, so we have August 25th, we have
And the only other option would be to add a meeting, which if we cannot, I would prefer not to, but if we need to, I would definitely would.
I'm so sorry, what was the other date, September 1st?
25th.
Yep.
The very next Thursday, September 1st.
Yep.
And then September 15th.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, may I make a suggestion?
Yes, you may.
And it's just a suggestion. So we have the meeting on the 25th that was actually supposed to be
The 18th
the 18th,
initially.
but it had to get bumped. And so the way it's laid out now is it's the 25th and the 1st. So you're gonna have back-to-back meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you, maybe the 1st, take care of school business the 25th, and if
And on the
Dorothy
15th,
could
right.
come back on the 1st.
If she's available.
Yeah, so, well, I am available on the 1st, but I can also tell you, this workshop generally is shorter, like it's about an hour or so, depending on how many questions you have.
Even better.
So,
That would be,
so,
perfect.
even if you had, a 2-hour meeting probably doesn't get into length of meeting problems, right? So even if you had a little bit of other business to attend to,
mhm.
there would be time to do both.
That'd be great. Can we agree to September 1st for, everyone okay with that? We're gonna be here anyway, so no, I guess we're
Right.
good.
Yeah,
And Kevin, that aligns with the outline that you had created on the 28th of April of when you wanted things to fall, which we need to discuss.
Okay. Well,
Look at you
Perfect.
creating happy accidents.
all right, thank you. Any other business? Then do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded?
All in favor? Opposed? 500. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.